And if you put, $10,000, which is 1/10 of a Bitcoin, into that reverse Kager calculator, even if it does 50% over the next 15 years, then you're sitting at about 4.2 million US dollars. The beginning of the Bitcoin gold rush, which essentially goes back to January 2024, was when the SEC approved the ETF. How most people measure Bitcoin still from the fiat system. We're all trying to measure our life through a broken money system when it comes to being a Bitcoiner. But at some point, we've got to start rewiring our thinking and start thinking in terms of Bitcoin and Satoshis. And it just opens up a whole new world for you in terms of what's possible. When you stop thinking of Bitcoin just as a store of value. And somewhere along the line, we need to be able to transact in this value system. I guess the challenge is people right now, they still think to themselves, well, why on earth would I spend Bitcoin when the Kager is 50 to 60% a year? I'm better off to spend my fiat, you know what I mean?
I want to touch on one topic that is really controversial in Bitcoin, and I think you also touched on it in some of your videos. I always say that 0.1 Bitcoin will be plenty and will be really good and can potentially retire even your family, depending on where you live and what your definition of retirement is. But I get a lot of backlash from that whenever I say that. And I think most Bitcoiners aren't actually bullish enough on Bitcoin. It feels like people don't grasp the full potential of Bitcoin, and they only look what's the total addressable market? Maybe it will be gold. How do you look at this whole thing of 0.1 Bitcoin, retirement, and what's the full potential of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of videos out there circulating that kind of have the 0.1 thing going, and it's very topical at the moment. And the way I look at it is, when I first got started in Bitcoin, I was focused on a target. So I kind of had in mind, once I'd done a certain amount of study, a certain amount of work, I'd read the book Bitcoin Standard, started listening to Robert Breedlove, Michael Saylor, quite a bit with Andreas Antonopoulos. And so once I'd sort of been down the rabbit hole and I decided, well, hey, this makes sense for me to get involved, I was thinking in terms of round numbers. And, that was back in January 2018 that I started. But I remember about 2-3 weeks after that, the price of Bitcoin fell by about 30%. But the thing is that because I knew what I was getting into, I used that as an opportunity to stack more. And I've kind of just been following that same strategy pretty much ever since for the past 8 years. But when it comes to the 0.1 thing, I think most sort of retail potential Bitcoiners, they kind of see the price of Bitcoin at 100K, and it kind of scares them off. And they think, well, the potential for me to get to one whole Bitcoin is kind of out of reach. And so rather than people kind of feel like they've missed the boat, or they're too late to Bitcoin, I like to say to them, well, look, you have to understand where we are on the adoption curve with this asset. This is kind of like the internet 1999. And, just because you didn't buy a Bitcoin like Max Kaiser or somebody for a buck or under a buck or whatever it was in 2010, 2011, you can still get a decent foothold into Bitcoin. And so when I look at 0.1 and I look at Bitcoin's historical compound annual growth rate over the last decade, sitting at 55 to 60%. And if you put, $10,000, which is 1/10 of a Bitcoin, into that reverse Kager calculator, and if Bitcoin, even if it does 50% over the next 15 years, then you're sitting at about 4.2 million US dollars. And so it just helps to give people a little perspective that if they allow the compound, the law of compounding to really do its thing, it's not too late for them to set themselves up for a very comfortable retirement if they have a 10 to 15 year time horizon. So, for me, it's all about just making people understand that there is no better investment, I believe, than Bitcoin. You're not too late. If you just break it down into bite-sized pieces and kind of start at 0.1 as a target, because I believe that anybody who's kind of in their 40s or 50s who is thinking about retirement in 10 to 20 years, if they put their mind to it, they can get to 0.1. So that's kind of my theory around it. And I find that most of the people I talk to, I do a lot of one-on-one sort of consultations with people in that age bracket. And most of them already are at 0.1. So they're just looking to sort of build that stack and get their self-custody in the right setup and all of that. So that's how I see it.
It's really good. And I think we also should not forget that 0.1 Bitcoin at the current price, it's almost $10,000. So that's a lot of money. That's more money than most people on Earth have. Like the average person on Earth doesn't have $10,000 in a savings account. You're already above the 50% line, maybe even like above the top 40% in the world when you have that amount, even if Bitcoin stays at the same purchasing power right now. So that's something I think to consider. I think a lot of those comments that say like, 0.1 Bitcoin is not enough. They might have like 100K, maybe 200K of expenses each year. And of course, like then like 0.1 Bitcoin will take a while till you can retire on that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I guess, we live in a big world where, 8 billion people, and we understand that most people, in the end are going to need Bitcoin for its purchasing power, preservation, qualities. But, I think in the future, we're going to be thinking in terms of Satoshis, not in terms of Bitcoin. And so, a lot of people don't understand that 0.1 is like, 10 million Satoshis. And, there's a belief that at some point, maybe not in our lifetime, but maybe in our, my kids' lifetime, we're going to see Satoshi and dollar parity, because Bitcoin is kind of a monetary system that is designed to actually reprice the world. So yeah, it's, I think eventually we're going to cross that point where we won't be talking about Bitcoin as much as we're actually talking about sats.
Very, very true. I love that. And you touched on it a little bit. I completely forgot my first question today that I usually ask. The question is like, who are you and what are you doing and why are you excited about Bitcoin? Maybe give us a little bit of a background, like what are you doing with the retirement consulting and who you are?
Yeah, great. So I'm 52. I came to Bitcoin in 2018. I heard about it in 2013. Just like everybody else, the first time I heard about it, I dismissed it. I thought it was crazy. It didn't make sense. At the time, I was very busy in my business for 15 years. My wife and I were hosts of a seminar company in Australia. We founded the company in 2005. And so for 15 years, we basically promoted and facilitated live seminars around the country, mainly in the health and wellness and personal development space. And then in 2020, COVID came along and it was an opportunity for us to rethink because we couldn't travel and do the events. And that was when I really, even though I'd been in Bitcoin for a little while, that was kind of the time where I really started to pay very close attention and really double down on my study and my learning about Bitcoin. And it's kind of been that way ever since. So the last 5 years, I've been very much down the rabbit hole, always learning though. I feel like Bitcoin is something that you can never stop learning. Every time you think you know everything there is to know about Bitcoin, you hear something else from somebody like Jeff Booth or, CJ Konstantinos or somebody like that. And you go, wow, I never thought of it that way. And, so I'm always learning, but for me, I see Bitcoin and the thing that drew me to Bitcoin was I've always been involved in real estate investing, and in Australia we've always had this love affair with property and real estate, and most Australians think that real estate is the best performing asset. Most of our wealth is tied up in real estate or the family home. But whatever it was, when I came back to Bitcoin in 2017, I actually, somebody else said to me, hey, have you heard about this Bitcoin thing? And I said, yeah, I've heard about it, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And then I signed up for a publication out of there was a publisher in Melbourne there was a gentleman by the name of Sam Volkering, and he put out this whole publication on essentially Bitcoin, Ethereum, and XRP. And it was basically, Bitcoin is the digital gold, Ethereum's going to be the new internet where everything is going to be built on top of it, and XRP is going to be the new money. And so that just really got my interest, and that's kind of where I've been with Bitcoin ever since. But for me, it was really I started out with Bitcoin because I thought, well, if this really is a finite asset, then I want to have a piece of it, right? Even though I don't really understand what it is and how it's going to work, the fact that it is the only finite asset that humanity has ever known, for me, I feel like I need to have some part of that, and kind of that was the start of it. But I've come to realize over several years now that there's so much more to Bitcoin than just that, and I think I'm in the camp with the likes of Peter Dunworth, who's another great Australian guy, Bitcoiner, who is very vocal in this space, and I think he's one of the top voices in the space. I believe that we've crossed the chasm now as far as Bitcoin. The potential of Bitcoin failing or going to zero is off the table, because essentially we now have endorsement from the biggest entity on earth, which of course is the US government. And whether you like that or not, I think that's just a reality that was always going to happen if Bitcoin survived to this point. I think it's all good things ahead for Bitcoin, and I'm just so happy to be a part of this community, because all I see is the smartest minds on earth all sort of working together to help people, and that's why I love it.
That's an amazing thing. Yeah, just really quickly, I love Jeff and CGK, as you mentioned it. Both have been actually 2 times on the podcast already. And funny enough, with CGK, I record the third round in 6 hours or something like that. So I'm looking forward to that. It's funny that you bring him up the day I recorded him also. You mentioned crossing the chasm. I think that's something a lot of Bitcoiners kind of talk about. Do you think it's all about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, or why are we now across the chasm, and what does this actually mean?
Yeah, well, I think Michael Saylor says it best. We all love what Michael Saylor has done for Bitcoin, but when he says that the most important defining moment for Bitcoin, the beginning of the Bitcoin gold rush, which essentially goes back to January 2024, was when the SEC approved the ETF, and so I think that was step one. And then step two was the US government, finally making a decision that they were going to endorse Bitcoin and start utilizing it as a strategic asset. I haven't heard how they're actually going to acquire the 1 million Bitcoin that they intend to acquire, because apparently they want to do it in a budget neutral fashion without raising taxes and without, printing money. There is some talk that maybe they're going to dispense with some of their gold reserves, which would be fascinating if they were to do that. But I think that all of these events that have taken place have kind of led us to this point where governments around the world are indebted. They know that they can't raise enough in taxes from the people because it's politically unpopular to do that. Yes, they have access to the big red button to print money, but all that does is drive inflation and a cost of living crisis and growing wealth gap, and we see all the problems in society that's creating. And so I just think that if Bitcoin remains decentralized and secure, as the great Jeff Booth keeps telling all of us, then Bitcoin is eventually going to take over the financial system, is what I believe. And so, yeah, that's, I think, when those critical events that have taken place in the last 18 months give me immense confidence moving forward into the future, and I think a lot of other people as well.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how many good news they come. There was a tweet that I recently saw, I think, from Nico from Simple Bitcoin. He tweeted out, "It's the best cycle for news in Bitcoin, but it's the worst cycle for price action." And
Yeah.
I kind of find it funny because I'm amazed how much good news and how less bad news, how less FUD there is out there. Even if I go out in outside of a little bit outside of my bubble and talk with people in Austria, yeah, they might not like Bitcoin. They might like, oh, it's a little volatile, but there's not a really big reason they don't buy it. They most are just too lazy to do the work. So I feel like we have everything ready, and it's just not the same excitement as it was years ago. And my theory, and I'm curious how you think about that. My theory currently is just like, yeah, it's institutional money that drives the price, and retail is completely sleeping on Bitcoin currently.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. But I think that, I did a video today on my channel, and I was talking about how people are going to come to Bitcoin either by choice or by force, and I think that, even though retail is asleep and the price action has been stagnant, we have to remember that Bitcoin crossed 100K for the first time in, was it December or November last year?
I think
towards the end of the year. When was it?
I think it was November. I can look it up next to when we talk.
So I mean, that was a defining moment. I mean, I remember the time when we crossed 10,000, and everyone was like, "How did that happen?" It's like, we just keep forgetting these little milestones that are taking place right before our eyes, and then, I think that generally speaking, because Bitcoin is such a dynamic asset, and it's a very youthful asset. I mean, it's still an adolescent. I mean, I raised 3 girls, so I know what it's like to have 3 16-year-olds growing up, and so Bitcoin's a 16-year-old baby, so it's going to have its ups and downs, right? We have to understand that anything that is that young is going to it's going to be volatile, and so it's. I just think people are impatient. We've probably been spoilt in the early days with Bitcoin about how explosive the moves are. But I think there's just an evolution of this asset. It's going to it's at some point the compound annual growth rate is going to level out. But I still think that all of the growth is ahead of us, given where we are on the adoption curve, and less than 3% or 3.5% of the population worldwide has any exposure to Bitcoin. So I think it's all ahead of us. I just think that Nico's right. It's all this great news, but not a lot of price action. But I think it's gonna happen, and we'll all be very pleased. But we just have to remember with all of this too, Robin, like, I'm a great believer in everything that Jeff Booth says about how most people measure Bitcoin still from the fiat system. We're all trying to measure our life through a broken money system when it comes to being a Bitcoiner. But at some point, we've got to start rewiring our thinking and start thinking in terms of Bitcoin and Satoshis, and how that is actually the value system, and repricing all of the stuff on the debt-based side. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's it's a moment when you no longer say, hey, this house is $250,000. You say, oh, this house is 0.56 Bitcoin. It's the moment when you default do, hey, I want to earn in Bitcoin. I want to transact in Bitcoin. I want to spend in Bitcoin. And I declare my wealth in Bitcoin, and I measure how much better I got when I have in Bitcoin, in Bitcoin, in Satoshis. How many more Satoshis did I get this month versus last month? That's the measurement, and no longer US dollar. And I did that for my personal life. I completely denominated everything from net worth and everything like that in Satoshis, which makes it way easier and a lot less emotional. If you just have a set amount of Satoshis that increases slightly every month, it's great. It's going up linearly. It's nice growth. If you have denominated in US dollar, you see jumps up and down, and you're like, oh shit, like that's like so volatile. But that mind shift, and I'm a big believer in the people that make that mind shift earlier, like not just buy Bitcoin, but make that mind shift to Bitcoin, will benefit the most, because they get that you've met probably also some OGs that have been in Bitcoin since like two cycles or more. They have some, and I'm not one of those. I'm just like one cycle, a little bit more than one cycle here. They have that Zen feeling about them. They are so calm. They are so in the moment, and they all do the same thing. They just have Bitcoin, and they buy Bitcoin when they have fiat, and they spend Bitcoin if they need some money, because they're just all in Bitcoin. And they don't care about the volatility. They don't play the fiat games. They just like, hey, I have Bitcoin. That's my life. And this Zen calmness is amazing. That's where I try to get.
I think that's where we all eventually aspire to be, because at the end of the day, Bitcoin is ultimately not just meant to be a store of value. It's also actually meant to be a medium of exchange, and I think a lot of Bitcoiners tend to forget that. But the more you listen to people like Jeff Booth, you start to remember. It's not that we don't know, it's just that we forgot, because we're spending so much time thinking about stacking Satoshis and holding on and never selling your Bitcoin and multi-generational wealth. But at some point, I do believe that there will be more of a parallel economy running, where people are value exchanging. I know it's already happening, and there are some companies that we know in this space that all they do is you can only pay them in Bitcoin, right? You can only pay them in Satoshis. So there are already certain businesses that are already doing this, and when you transact with those companies and you start actually utilizing Satoshis to do that, it just opens up a whole new world for you in terms of what's possible. And you stop thinking of Bitcoin just as a store of value. So I find that, I think we're going to get to that point. I'm not sure how long that's going to take, but I do believe that the more Bitcoin, the more people that come to Bitcoin, the more adoption that takes place. I think the more that, we're going to start pricing everyday items in Satoshis, and people are going to want to do business like that. And I also think that what may accelerate this is when people start saying, I'm no longer going to accept dollars, because maybe they inflate the currency away to the point where people go, well, this shit's worthless now. It's like, we're not prepared to work for dollars anymore. Maybe that's 5 years, maybe it's 10, I'm not sure, but I can see a day where perhaps that may come as well. I'm not saying everybody, I'm saying certain factions of society will say, well, I'm not going to build you a house, or I'm not going to, do the be an electrician or whatever the work is, whatever the exchange is. They say, well, we only accept Satoshis. I can see that day coming. How about you?
I see that faster and faster approaching, because I now already, I always try to bring things back to what I actually know and already experience. And 1 year ago, I already had the podcast and I already earned money from the podcast, and the podcast was all about Bitcoin. But 1 year ago, exactly 1 year ago, I did not had a single Satoshi earned. I only earned euros. So, and this changed now so much that now 70% roughly of my income is directly earned in Satoshis. And about, let's say, 10, 20%, something like that, of my expenses also directly in Satoshis. So I'm forced to sell Bitcoin on that because I have fiat bills to pay. But the percentage will get bigger and bigger. And it's more and more of a hustle for me to accept fiat on earning and spending. I just want to have Bitcoin. Like that's the income and the expenses in Bitcoin is growing, and the more this grows, the less I'm getting a fan of still accepting fiat. And we're seeing that with a very famous example, Ben from BTC Sessions. He says publicly, on my podcast, he said it on many others also, he said, if you want to pay me in fiat, I charge you a 15% premium because I don't want to deal with fiat. So if you force me to deal with fiat, I charge you a premium. It's not a discount on Bitcoin payments because Bitcoin payments is the standard. So if you want to have something else, you get a premium. I mean, of course, you have to be in a position where you can do that. Charge people a premium just for the what money they use. But it will get more and more common if someone has something valuable to sell and they can choose who to sell it to, they will choose to earn it in Bitcoin. And this will be the norm. And I'm amazed how far we already, you said before, like you're like 16-year-old teenager. And I'm 26 years old, so I'm not that far away from that time. And I still feel very volatile. But 16 is nothing. And we already have a circular economy around the world. I already get paid and I already pay in Bitcoin. So there's already a payment stream that's only in Bitcoin. It's so exciting how fast we are progressing. And people only look at the price and they don't see the real revolution that's going on outside of, the price is going up a little bit. Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin Way. The Bitcoin Way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in the jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary, and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward seeing you there.
Well, I agree, man, and this is kind of, you articulated that really well, because that's the point that I'm really trying to make here, is that, you know, we're kind of in this little echo chamber as Bitcoiners. You know, everybody's running podcasts and sharing their wisdom and trying to orange pill the world and tell people, hey, there's a life raft here. Get on this bloody life raft as quickly as you can. And, you know, but store of value and preserving your economic energy is just part of the equation. You know, there's so much more to it beyond that I think as time goes on, I mean, we're all learning. I'm learning every day. I'm learning more and getting more comfortable with the idea of, you know, not that I'm there yet, but the idea of starting to exchange value in Satoshis, and like you say, it's a space that I can see is moving really fast. I guess the challenge is, you know, if all the world is still operating in euros or dollars, you know, it's pretty hard to ask people outside of Bitcoin for Bitcoin or for Satoshis when they don't own any Bitcoin or Satoshis, you know. So it's just, we've got to wait until there's that, I guess, that next wave of adoption where it becomes more common for people to have their Bitcoin savings account and their dollar account, and then, like Ben says from BTC sessions, you know, like, you've now got a choice. You want to save, you pay in Satoshis.
That's very true. One question that I'm still a little bothered by, or like bothered, I still ponder around that question. Jeff brought it up in the last podcast. I did it with him. He said, if Bitcoin fails as a medium of exchange, it will ultimately also fail as a store of value. Do you agree with that? I
never understood that, but now I'm starting to understand that, you know, and I think we've got to go back to the Bitcoin white paper, you know, to somewhere along the line, and I'm not sure whether it was Michael Saylor coming in and really advocating it for it to be a store of value and never sell your Bitcoin. I'm not sure if that's where it all sort of moved away from the peer-to-peer cash thing, because I think it's fair to say up until 2020, we still really didn't understand that much about Bitcoin. You know, we didn't really know whether it was going to survive. And, you know, I think that whole era with the health crisis was a time where people really started to double down on looking for alternatives and trying to escape the matrix, and Bitcoin was an obvious thing for people to spend some time learning about during that 2020, 2021. Meanwhile, MicroStrategy comes along and they start really leading the way, and Michael Saylor becomes a public figure. But yeah, I the more I listen to Jeff Booth, the more I realize that that is the case, that we at somewhere along the line, we need to be able to transact in this value system. I guess the challenge is you know, people right now, they still think to themselves, well, why on earth would I spend Bitcoin when the CAGR is 50 to 60% a year? I'm better off to spend my fiat, you know what I mean? And so I think we've got a ways to go. So I'm not quite sure. I mean, he's a genius guy, and I don't know how you know, how much time he sees that we need for it to reach that critical point where, unless we move into a medium of exchange, it will fail. I'm not sure. Is that 5 years? Is it 10 years? Because we're not there yet, right? And Bitcoin's not failing. It's getting stronger and more decentralized. But is there a point where we need to move from a store of value into a medium of exchange? And I believe historically, through the evolution of money, I believe that it's always begun as a store of value. and then moved into a medium of exchange. And so maybe that is yet to come. But yeah, I certainly believe that, I'm not sure whether it will fail, because I'm not sure about that. But I certainly believe that for Bitcoin to be a ubiquitous part of society, we will need to utilize it as a medium of exchange in some form. And I think with Lightning, obviously, it presents the opportunity for us to go down to the corner store or local cafe and buy a coffee and have instant settlement. The tools are already there. It's just a matter of time for the adoption to come in, I guess.
Yeah, it's also something that I struggle a little bit with saying, like, if media exchange fails, store of value should also fail. For me, I like to bring another perspective into this. I like to say, if Bitcoin as a store of value succeeds, people will start spending it, and it will succeed also as a medium of exchange. I think that's a natural progression. And we're already seeing that with like myself and like a lot of other people, as an example, how this actually works out. So I think it's a natural progression, but I think the message that he says is very important, that we should not lose the focus. Because if everyone is just focused on number crop technology, maybe everyone is all of a sudden no longer in the base layer, and they're like just trying to get a little bit more Bitcoin. They're just trying to maximize with leverage, with ETFs, with strategy, with other vehicles to gain more store of value, more number grab technology. So I think the focus should be on sovereignty and less on number grab technology. Maybe that's also one of the messages behind the thing he's saying with medium of exchange and store of value, where we have to focus on the sovereignty. It's also, I think we talked about it before, that you're also really big on how to be self-sovereign, and you're going through that right now. I think, as you said with Tony, how important is self-sovereignty, and why do you think people struggle with that and keep it on exchange and do those weird things?
I think it's just education. I think it's just we've become so accustomed over so many years to just entrust the system to take care of our assets and our money, and everything from real estate to shares and stocks and everything in between. They're all tied to the system, and we don't really, when it all boils down to it, actually own them. We kind of have a paper claim on them for as long as we're following the rules, and so like everybody thinks they own their house, but we only really have a title deed or a paper claim that says that, we own that piece of real estate. But the reality is that the rules can be changed, and property rights can be taken away, and we don't have absolute ownership of that asset, and we only really own it for as long as we're paying the land taxes and the rates and everything that goes with it. And so when I think of Bitcoin, I think it is as the only truly sovereign asset that we have absolute autonomy and ownership of. And so, when you think about storing your wealth that you've worked, 20, 30, 40 years to accumulate, and this, most of the people that I talk with and consult with, they're in their sort of late 40s, early 50s, and they have maybe 10 to 15 year time horizon until retirement. And, we have things happening in this country now that are a concern in terms of they're going after taxing unrealized capital gains in superannuation. That's a new rule they want to bring in. We just had an election here, and the party that said that that's what they're going to do, everybody voted for that. So they think they have a mandate to bring that in. And so people are concerned because they don't know what their retirement funding is going to look like. And so, I just think that, when it comes to protecting and preserving everything that you've worked so hard to accumulate over a lot of years, everybody should have some allocation to this sovereign money that is completely portable, completely permissionless. There's no counterparty. Completely, decentralized. It's ubiquitous around the world. It's highly liquid. It's 24/7, 365 in terms of being able to liquidate it if you need to. And so I just think that we're in a world now where we have to be taking that very seriously. I mean, we know that Europe is bringing out their central bank digital currencies is it October this year?
Yeah, it's the first deadline is October, but it's not like it's completely there in October. There's a lot of steps to follow, but like the first small steps is in October.
So it's always small steps, and then it becomes bigger steps. And but we know that where all this stuff goes, and I think Bitcoin was made for this, and this is why I think the sovereignty part is so important. And for anybody who doubts that, they only really need to go and spend some time listening to, Tony Yazbek of the Bitcoin Way, and you'll get very clear that banks can fail and do fail. People can lose their life savings. There is such a thing as capital controls. We saw this in Cyprus in 2013. We saw it in Lebanon in 2019. Tony was caught up in that in Lebanon. We saw some banks fail in Silicon Valley in, when was that, 2023? First Republic, Silicon Valley Bank, a couple of others. I think that most of those people got their money back through FDIC. However, those bailouts, what do? They just create more dilution, more currency dilution, more inflation. And so these are all the things we have to take into account now. And so, I think when it comes to an asset that has the attributes and the hallmarks of allowing you to actually have absolute ownership of your wealth and to take it anywhere in the world that you choose, whenever you choose, that's a very powerful instrument, very powerful technology that I don't think enough people are paying attention to. And it's just education. It's just not understanding what they actually own when they buy Bitcoin. People are good at saying, well, hey, I'm going to buy, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, and they leave it there on the exchange and then they forget about it. Or maybe they buy a hardware wallet, but it takes them 6 months to get it from the exchange onto their wallet. And then they put their seed phrase in their top drawer, and so they're not following all of the steps and treating their holding with the attention and the I guess the respect that it deserves, because they're not seeing the value of the asset that they hold. And so that's why I think the sovereignty thing needs more education. We need to spend as much time talking about what the price of Bitcoin is going to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. We need to spend as much time on but how do you secure it? How do you take it off an exchange? How do you run your own node? How do you, have the right device that's, Bitcoin only, and all of those kinds of things, air gapped, and, just these little things that people aren't aware of. And every day I speak to people who had no idea about any of this stuff, so, I always say that Bitcoin really promises two things if you study it and you do it right. One is wealth acceleration, because we know it's the best performing asset over the last decade, and the other is wealth protection. But it only protects your wealth if you take it into self-custody and you do it right.
Yeah, and you also don't benefit from the wealth acceleration if your account gets closed.
100%, man. So true.
So you need both of them to get both of them. Otherwise, you don't have any of them. Very true. You mentioned real estate a lot, and it's actually a pattern that I've noticed with Australian Bitcoiners. they really like making the comparison to the real estate. Is it that bad with real estate in Australia? Is it like that high of a prices, or everybody uses savings technology, or like why is the focus on real estate that big?
Look, we've all grown up with the great Australian dream, as it's so called, and I think they have the same in America. The great American dream has always been to own your own home. And as kids, we're raised with a backyard. We can kick the ball around and a set of swings, and we're in a nice, comfortable suburb, and, you know, you can survive on one income, and life's good, you know. And back in the late 70s, early 80s, you know, you could buy a house for, you know, 3 to 4 times the average annual wage. But now it's like 15 times the average annual wage. And this is why, you know, even if 2 people, mum and dad, go to work, it's still not enough, you know. And so people trying to get into the property market now, they've kind of, they've really missed the boat. And the only way that young people now can get into the market is if they get an inheritance from, you know, their parents, or if the bank of mum and dad steps up with a deposit to help them into the property market. But even if they do that, they're going to have a mortgage that is so large that, you know, they're going to be paying it off for the rest of their life, you know. And obviously, you know, if you're in the top 5% of income earners, you know, fair enough, you know, maybe you're going to be okay. But the average person coming out of university in their 20s now, in Sydney, for example, for them to buy a unit, never mind a house, just an apartment, it'll take, they've worked out 20 years to save enough for a deposit. So this is the problem we have now. We never had this problem you never noticed it up until probably the last 10 years, and accelerated through since 2020 with COVID. But now we're in a situation where people are saying, and I think Peter Dunworth was saying this the other day on one of his podcasts. He was saying that the 100x opportunity with real estate over the last 50 years is now gone. And so the next 100x opportunity is really what Bitcoin is. And I know CJ talks about this too, and how we went from financializing gold, going off the gold standard, to financializing real estate. And now Bitcoin is going to extract all of the premium, all of the wasted premium in real estate is going to flow into Bitcoin. And so this is why a lot of people now are sort of saying, well, I'm not sure about this real estate thing anymore. Maybe I'm going to sell a rental property, or I'm going to think twice about saving up for a house. Maybe I'm just going to buy Bitcoin instead, you know, if you're a young person. So, yeah, the whole real estate thing here it's a big issue, because we've all felt entitled to have our own home. But unfortunately, there's a whole generation now that just, it's not going to be possible unless they think outside the box. And this is why I teach my kids, I've got 3 daughters in their 20s, to all save a percentage of their income in Bitcoin. And my goal for them is to get them to that 0.1 as quickly as they can, because they have time on their side, like you, Robin. It's no big deal if they need to wait 10, 15 years to buy a home, you know?
Do you still think that you should buy a home? Let's say, if 16 is probably a bad time to buy a home, but maybe if you're already 35, you already have some Satoshis stacked. Is that still a big thing where you're like, okay, maybe it's better to just rent and put the money in Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it depends on how much Bitcoin you have, you know, how comfortable your life is without having a home. Like if you're sharing a house with 5 people, you know, and it's really important to your life that you maybe get your own place, and, you know, maybe you want to start a family or whatever. I mean, we're seeing around where we live now, there's so many people who are sharing, and there's like 4, 5, 6 people sharing a 3-bedroom townhouse or a home or an old house or apartment. And so I think if you're in that situation, you know, where you're like, okay, I really do want a house because for my lifestyle, so that I can have some autonomy, privacy, maybe raise a family, whatever it might be, then maybe, yeah, you should prioritize getting real estate instead. But I think if you've got a 5 to 10 year time horizon where it's not going to bother you, and you're happy to wait, I would say you're better off putting your savings and your capital into Bitcoin, because you only need to price real estate in Bitcoin over the past 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. It doesn't matter how far back you go. So long as you choose at least 4 years, you're going to see that the price of real estate is going like this when priced in Bitcoin. And so the longer you hold on to your Bitcoin, the cheaper the house is going to become. So it's really a situation dependent on every individual, I guess. But I think the younger you are, the more you should consider waiting until you can more substantially be able to have more equity in that house. And the other thing to keep in mind is this space is evolving so rapidly when it comes to different lending products and things that are evolving. You know, again, CJ Konstantinos, the People's Reserve, and companies like Ledin and all of that. Like, if you can really build your stack to a meaningful level over the next few years, then who knows what the opportunity is going to be in 5-10 years for you to buy real estate. Maybe you won't have to sell your stack if you have the income to service the loan, you know?
And interesting thought, yeah. It's also, I mean, there's a lot of financial engineering going on, but in general, I feel like and then I looked at that actually up. Can you buy the same home that you can buy? Can you also rent this? Like, are there like single family homes? Like I saw it in Austria, also to rent, and there's a lot of opportunities. It's all about like the opportunity cost in the end of the day. And there's people saying, oh yeah, but then someone can kick you out. It's also not that easy. when you're renting, you have a contract. You have to have a good reason, especially in countries like Austria. I guess it's similar in Australia, that for landlord, it's kind of hard to kick someone really out.
Yeah, it is.
Especially if they're paying rent and not done anything really, really bad. But I understand. So for me, right now, it's if you emotionally want real estate, like, then there's not a chance that you're not buying it anyways. But other than that, like, financially, it does not make sense. If you acknowledge that it's financially does not make sense to buy real estate instead of Bitcoin right now, then yeah, like, go ahead and do that. But I've met a lot of Bitcoiners that made that same thing and a same decision, and they all regret it for some reason.
Listen, we bought a piece of real estate about 3 years ago, and it's actually a block of land, and it's got 2 old homes on it that were built in the very early 70s, and we're renting them out. So it's like an investment. But at some point, we hope to clear the old homes off and build. But if I look at the price of that piece of real estate in Bitcoin in 2023, when we bought it, 2022, compared to now, you know, even though the price has gone up maybe 25% in fiat, in Australian dollars, it's gone down 75% in Bitcoin. So, you know, we would have been better off from an investment perspective to actually put that capital into Bitcoin. And right now, we'd probably not only have the block of land, we'd also have the house on top of the block of land, you know, and that's, so it's just, these are the things that you realize the longer you're in Bitcoin. You just start to realize, well, hang on, there is no better place to park your savings and your capital. And this is why I say anybody who's thinking about buying a house, you just have to think really seriously about, is that really the right decision for you to make today? Or can you be patient? Is your living arrangement good enough for you to be able to still put up with it for the next 5 years or so? Because I believe we've just got so much ahead of us with Bitcoin and the financialization of it as an asset class and all the options that we're going to have as Bitcoiners. So just be patient if you can, you know, that's the main thing.
Absolutely. And there are some people that always bring up that it's easy to say like the past 5 years, past 10 years, because the growth has been really good. And people feel for some reason this 100K mark is late because it looks so much bigger than 10K or like 1K. But the same thing was true for people that looked from $100 to $1,000. They thought they're super late at $1,000. So it's really interesting how much psychology is playing a part in those financial decision. And I'm so late to Bitcoin. It's almost at 100K.
That's so true. But then you listen to again someone like Peter Dunworth or Jeff Booth. And someone says to Jeff the other day on an interview, "So Jeff, what's the true value of Bitcoin today in fiat dollars?" And he says, 43 million. And they say, well, how do you come up with that? Well, there's 900 trillion worth of assets in the world. Divide by 21 million, that's 43 million. So if Bitcoin is the true free market, the true first global free market that we've ever had, like he keeps saying, and it's just going to keep repricing everything, then eventually he's basically saying that's why you have to look at Bitcoin as the only free market. And so you take all the assets on earth, you divide it by 21 million, even though we don't have 21 million because, 4,000 or so lost forever. But yeah, so it's fascinating to think about that. It's not easy to get your head around, but I think that as time goes on, he's going to be proven right. It's because Bitcoin is just going to continue to absorb all of the premium and the financial energy out of all of these other asset classes as people realize, well, it's scarce, absolutely scarce. It's fixed. It's finite. The rules can't be changed. It's just going to eat everything.
Absolutely. I have one question to ask each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
What can you learn from me besides Bitcoin? I spent 15 years in the alternative health space, so a lot of what we used to share at our workshops was very much around being self-sovereign from a health perspective. So not entrusting your health to the medical system, being self-responsible and have a preventative type mindset around health. Probably just that, just to understand that, Bitcoin is a way for us to be self-sovereign in our money, but we also need to be self-sovereign in the way that we take care of our health and our body. And I think that there's a beautiful synergy between both, because at the end of the day, with Bitcoin, what are we really trying to do? We're trying to sort of take back or reclaim the future, right? So we're all looking forward to a brighter future the longer that we're in Bitcoin, but there's no point if it comes at the expense of our health or not taking care of ourselves. And so I like to think that as Bitcoiners, the future's bright. But that means we've got to really pay attention to doing all the right things from a health and wellness perspective, so that when we get to this beautiful place where we're all going to end up, we've got plenty of life left in us to enjoy it.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. That's really a good message. We have an end routine, as you know, in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the question from the previous guest is, what price would you pay to store information online forever?
What sort of information? I think if it comes to sensitive information regarding to Bitcoin, I'd pretty much pay any price. But I'm not quite sure what the context of the question is. But I can only think there's really nothing online that would be absolutely life-changing for me that I'd need to preserve. So other than probably some sensitive information relating to Bitcoin.
Yeah, and that's you don't want to also maybe not want to store online forever.
No. But sort of, arm's length stuff. But yeah, no, I can't really think of something that I'd spend a crazy amount of money to keep online.
Very, very true. Really cool. Perfect. Then thank you so much, Zane, for being on the podcast. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yeah, just look me up on YouTube. I've got a growing YouTube channel at Zane Truscott, and also you can go to my website, zanetruscott.com.
Really cool. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you, and as always, thank you so much for everyone also that is watching and that is listening and watching, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye bye.